The Iron Fist and the Empty Silo. Stalin's first 5-year plan. Joseph Stalin, having consolidated power in the Soviet Union, embarked on a radical economic transformation. His first 5-year plan, unveiled in 1928, aimed to propel the nation from an agrarian backwater to an industrial powerhouse. However, this ambitious vision, fueled by ruthless coercion, cast a long shadow, marked by forced collectivization, dissent crushed under the iron fist of the state, and the chilling expansion of the Gulag network. We will delve into the objectives and consequences of the first 5-year plan, examining the brutal methods employed to achieve Stalin's vision and the devastating human cost of this rapid industrialization. The first 5-year plan was a centrally oriented economic policy designed to rapidly develop heavy industry in the Soviet Union. Stalin, disillusioned with the slow pace of economic development under the new economic policy, envisioned a state-controlled economy churning out steel, coal, and machinery at an unprecedented rate. This ambitious plan aimed to bridge the gap between the Soviet Union and the more industrialized nations of the West. A key component of the plan was the collectivization of agriculture. Individual peasant farms, deemed inefficient by Stalin, were forcibly consolidated into large state-run collectives. This dramatic shift aimed to increase agricultural output and provide a steady supply of food for the growing urban workforce. However, the collectivization drive was implemented with brutal efficiency, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Resistance to collectivization was swift and widespread. Peasants, accustomed to a degree of autonomy, fiercely resisted the loss of their land and traditional way of life. They slaughtered their livestock rather than surrender them to the collectives, leading to a devastating decline in food production. Stalin, determined to crush dissent, unleashed a wave of repression. Those deemed kulaks, a term loosely applied to wealthier peasants, were targeted for persecution. Millions were forcibly relocated to Siberia or incarcerated in the Gulag, a network of forced labor camps that had existed since the early Soviet era. The Gulag system, under Stalin's reign, expanded dramatically, becoming a vast archipelago of suffering, where political dissidents, ethnic minorities, and those who resisted collectivization were subjected to harsh labor conditions and horrific living standards. The human cost of the first 5-year plan was staggering. Millions perished in the famines that swept across the Soviet Union as a result of the collapse of agricultural production. The Gulag system claimed countless lives through harsh labor, brutal treatment, and disease. The once vibrant rural landscape became a symbol of repression, as traditional peasant life was shattered in the pursuit of rapid industrialization. Despite the human cost, the first 5-year plan achieved some of its industrial goals. Heavy industry production soared, laying the foundation for the Soviet Union's future military might. However, this success came at a terrible price. The agricultural sector remained stunted for decades, and the trauma inflicted upon the peasantry cast a long shadow over Soviet society. The legacy of Stalin's first 5-year plan remains a subject of debate. Some see it as a necessary evil, a harsh but ultimately successful step towards modernization. Others view it as a brutal exercise in social engineering that prioritized industrial might at the expense of the human cost. The expansion of the Gulag system under this plan stands as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which the Soviet state was willing to go to enforce its ideology. A fragile hope. The Round Table Conferences and the quest for Indian self-governance. The embers of discontent glowed across British-ruled India in the early 20th century. Nationalist fervor, fueled by a yearning for self-determination, challenged the edifice of colonial power. In response, a series of conferences, known as the Round Table Conferences, were convened in a bid to forge a path towards a more autonomous India. The seeds of the Round Table Conferences were sown in the fertile ground of escalating demands for Indian self-government. The Indian National Congress, led by figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, had emerged as a powerful voice for Indian independence. Meanwhile, the British Raj, facing increasing pressure both domestically and internationally, sought a managed transition to prevent a violent upheaval. The conferences, held between 1930 and 1932, brought together representatives of the British government, Indian political parties, and various princely states. The air crackled with tension as diverse groups, each with their own vision for India's future, grappled with complex issues of representation, federalism, and minority rights. At the heart of the debate lay the question of the extent of self-governance India would be granted. The British envisioned a gradual devolution of power, with a continued role for the Raj in key areas. Indian nationalists, on the other hand, demanded a significant transfer of power, leading towards dominion status within the British Commonwealth. The issue of minority rights, particularly the concerns of Muslims who feared domination by a Hindu-majority India, further complicated the negotiations. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a prominent Muslim leader, advocated for separate electorates and safeguards for Muslim interests, a demand that would eventually culminate in the creation of Pakistan. Despite the earnest efforts of some participants, the Round Table conferences ultimately failed to achieve a breakthrough. The gulf between British proposals for a limited autonomy and Indian demands for self-rule remained unbridgeable. Mistrust between the parties, coupled with internal disagreements within the Indian political spectrum, hampered progress. The legacy of the Round Table conferences remains a subject of debate. Some view them as a missed opportunity for a peaceful transition to Indian self-governance. Others argue that the conferences, despite their failure, provided a valuable platform for dialogue and helped shape the contours of the eventual independence struggle. The conferences undoubtedly played a role in highlighting the growing strength of Indian nationalism on the world stage. They also served as a training ground for Indian politicians, honing their negotiating skills and forging alliances as they prepared for the challenges ahead. However, the failure to bridge the divide between British and Indian aspirations ultimately paved the way for a more confrontational phase of the independence struggle. The civil disobedience movement, led by Gandhi, and the rise of more radical nationalist groups marked a shift towards more direct action tactics. The echoes of the Round Table conferences continue to resonate in contemporary India. The challenges of balancing diverse interests, forging national unity, and protecting minority rights remain relevant issues. The conferences serve as a reminder of the complexities of decolonization and the ongoing quest to forge a truly inclusive and democratic India. Though ultimately unsuccessful in their immediate objective, the conferences remain a significant chapter in India's journey towards independence, a testament to the enduring spirit of a nation yearning for self-rule. A nation at a crossroads. The 1930 German federal election. The year 1930 marked a pivotal moment in the tumultuous history of the Weimar Republic. Germany, still reeling from the scars of the First World War and grappling with economic instability, faced a stark choice at the ballot box. The 1930 federal election, a clash of ideologies echoing across a nation teetering on the brink, stands as a stark reminder of the fragile nature of democracy and the seductive allure of extremism. The air crackled with tension as Germans went to the polls. The once dominant Social Democratic Party, or SPD, weakened by internal divisions and a faltering economy, clung precariously to power. On the fringes, the Communist Party, the KDP, offered a radical vision of social upheaval, while the burgeoning National Socialist, or Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, NSDAP, led by the charismatic Adolf Hitler, espoused a virulently nationalist and anti-Semitic ideology. The economic woes of the nation served as a fertile breeding ground for discontent. The Great Depression, casting a long shadow across the globe, had reached Germany's shores, bringing with it widespread unemployment, social unrest, and a gnawing sense of despair. The fragile prosperity of the post-war years had evaporated, leaving millions disillusioned with the established political order. The established parties, burdened by the legacy of defeat and the complexities of coalition politics, struggled to offer a compelling vision for the future. The SPD, despite remaining the largest party, lacked the leadership and resolve to navigate the gathering storm. Meanwhile, the fragmented parties of the center and right failed to inspire a sense of national unity. This political vacuum presented a golden opportunity for the extremist parties on the fringes. The KDP, capitalizing on the economic hardship, promised a radical socialist revolution that would upend the existing social order. However, their message resonated primarily with a discontented segment of the working class, failing to capture the broader national mood. The true storm brewing on the horizon came from the far right. The NSDAP, fueled by Hitler's potent oratory and a growing sense of nationalist fervor, offered a seductive blend of scapegoating, resentment, and promises of national renewal. The party's virulently anti-Semitic ideology and expansionist aims found fertile ground amongst those yearning for a return to German greatness. The election results sent a shockwave through the nation. The SPD, though remaining the largest party, suffered significant losses. The KDP saw a modest increase in its share of the vote, but their influence remained limited. The true story of the election belonged to the NSDAP, whose vote share soared by an astounding 15.7 percentage points, propelling them from a fringe group to a major political force in the Reichstag. The rise of the Nazis was not a sudden eruption, but a culmination of simmering discontent that the established parties had failed to address. The economic woes, coupled with a sense of national humiliation following the First World War, created a fertile ground for the Nazi message of hate and scapegoating. The legacy of the 1930 German federal election continues to cast a long shadow. It serves as a chilling reminder of the fragility of democracy and the dangers of ignoring the grievances of a disillusioned populace. The election marked a turning point, a harbinger of the Nazi ascent to power, and the horrors that would engulf Europe in the years to come. A land desolated. The Soviet famine of 1930 to 1933. A shroud of despair descended upon the Soviet Union in the early 1930s. A chilling specter, the gnawing hunger of famine, stalked the land, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. We will explore the Soviet famine of 1930 to 1933, a complex tragedy fueled by a confluence of environmental hardship, brutal state policies, and a ruthless disregard for human life under Stalin's iron fist. The echoes of this harrowing chapter in Soviet history continue to resonate today, a stark reminder of the human cost of ideology and the perils of totalitarian control. The seeds of the famine were sown in a fertile ground of environmental vulnerability and political upheaval. Harsh weather patterns, marked by relentless drought and brutal winters, ravaged agricultural production. These natural disasters struck a nation already weakened by Stalin's rapid industrialization drive, the first five-year plan. Collectivization, the forced consolidation of peasant farms into state-run collectives, had disrupted traditional agricultural practices and sowed chaos in the countryside. The Soviet government, under Stalin's leadership, compounded the tragedy with a series of disastrous policies. Grain quotas, set at unrealistic levels, further strained the already depleted agricultural resources. Officials, fearing Stalin's wrath, prioritized fulfilling quotas over acknowledging the unfolding famine. Information was suppressed, and reports of starvation were ignored or dismissed as kulak propaganda. The human cost of the famine was staggering. Millions perished across the Soviet Union, particularly in the grain-producing regions of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the North Caucasus. The specter of hunger stalked the land, leaving a trail of emaciated bodies and shattered families in its wake. Cannibalism and disease became grim realities, a testament to the utter breakdown of social order. The international community responded with a mixture of horror and helplessness. News of the famine trickled out of the Soviet Union, prompting calls for aid. However, suspicion of the Soviet regime and concerns about political interference hampered large-scale relief efforts. The Soviet government, unwilling to admit the extent of the crisis or accept blame, further hindered international intervention. The legacy of the Soviet famine of 1930 to 1933 remains a subject of intense debate, particularly in Ukraine, where the famine is remembered as the Holodomor, a deliberate act of genocide orchestrated by the Soviet state. While some argue that the famine was a tragic consequence of natural disasters and misguided policies, others point to the deliberate targeting of Ukrainian peasants and the suppression of Ukrainian nationalism as evidence of genocidal intent. The echoes of this harrowing chapter continue to resonate today. The famine serves as a chilling reminder of the devastating consequences of totalitarian control, where ideology trumps human life and dissent is met with brutal repression. It also highlights the importance of transparency and international cooperation in addressing humanitarian crises. The Soviet famine of 1930 to 1933 remains a dark stain on the history of the Soviet Union. It stands as a cautionary tale, urging us to learn from the past and ensure that the specter of famine never again haunts a nation with such devastating consequences. The memory of this tragedy compels us to value human life, prioritize food security, and speak out against the silencing of dissent, especially in the face of impending catastrophe. The echoes of financial fragility. The 1931 European banking crisis. The year 1931 dawned on a Europe still scarred from the Great War, yet harboring a nascent hope for economic recovery. However, beneath the glittering facade lurked a hidden vulnerability, a house of cards precariously balanced on a foundation of unsustainable practices. The European banking crisis of 1931, a sudden and brutal collapse, shattered this fragile optimism and plunged the continent into a deeper economic despair. We will explore the events leading up to the crisis, the harrowing days that witnessed the financial meltdown, and the long shadow cast upon the global economy. The United States in the Roaring Twenties, awash in capital, emerged as a major creditor, fueling a wave of loans to European countries and businesses. These loans, often granted without proper scrutiny, were used to finance reconstruction efforts and stimulate economic growth. However, this influx of foreign capital masked deeper structural weaknesses within European economies. Underlying this financial frenzy was a dangerous imbalance. European banks, eager to capitalize on the easy availability of funds, engaged in risky lending practices. Short-term loans were used to finance long-term investments, creating a dangerous mismatch in maturities. Furthermore, a lack of adequate regulation allowed banks to operate with insufficient capital reserves, leaving them vulnerable to any sudden shocks. The first tremors of the impending earthquake arrived in 1929 with the Wall Street crash. The American stock market's dramatic collapse sent shockwaves across the Atlantic, eroding investor confidence and triggering a wave of loan defaults. European economies, heavily reliant on American capital, were particularly vulnerable. Austria, burdened by war debt and a fragile financial system, became the first domino to fall. In May 1931, the collapse of Creditanstalt, a major Austrian bank, sent a jolt of panic through the European financial system. Investors, fearing contagion, rushed to withdraw their funds from other European banks, creating a liquidity crisis. The following months witnessed a domino effect of bank failures. Germany, deeply intertwined with the Austrian economy, saw its own banking giants teeter on the brink. The collapse of the Darmstädter und Nationalbank, Danette Bank, in July 1931 further eroded confidence and triggered a full-blown banking crisis. Desperate attempts to contain the crisis proved futile. Countries resorted to protectionist measures, raising trade barriers to safeguard their own economies. This further disrupted international trade flows, deepening the economic recession. Unemployment soared, social unrest simmered, and the specter of political extremism loomed large. The story of this crisis compels us to prioritize financial stability, promote responsible lending practices, and foster international cooperation to prevent a similar financial catastrophe from engulfing the world once again. A shadow over Manchuria, Japan's imperial ambitions and the prelude to war. A tremor of aggression rippled across East Asia in 1931. The Japanese Empire, fueled by a potent cocktail of nationalism and expansionist ambitions, set its sights on Manchuria, a vast and resource-rich region in northern China. The subsequent invasion, a brazen act of military aggression, shattered the fragile peace of the region and cast a long shadow over the world stage, ultimately serving as a grim prelude to a wider global conflict. We will explore the complex web of factors that led to the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the events that unfolded, and the devastating consequences that reverberated across Asia and beyond. The seeds of the invasion were sown in the fertile ground of Japan's growing militarism and a yearning for empire. The nation, having undergone rapid industrialization, craved raw materials and markets to fuel its burgeoning economy. Manchuria, with its vast reserves of coal, iron ore, and fertile farmland, beckoned as a potential solution to Japan's resource anxieties. Adding fuel to the fire was a sense of national humiliation stemming from Japan's unequaled treaties with Western powers. Nationalistic fervor, stoked by a military establishment hungry for influence, envisioned Manchuria as a stepping stone towards a broader Asian empire. The perceived weakness of the Chinese nationalist government, embroiled in internal conflict, further emboldened Japan's expansionist ambitions. The spark that ignited the tinderbox came in the form of the Mukden incident. On September 18, 1931, a section of railway track owned by Japan's South Manchuria Railway Company was damaged. The Japanese military, without concrete evidence, blamed the act on Chinese dissidents and used it as a pretext for a full-scale invasion. The Kwantung Army, stationed in Manchuria, spearheaded the attack. Poorly equipped and disorganized Chinese forces were no match for the well-armed Japanese troops. Major cities like Mukden and Changchun fell swiftly, and by February 1932, Japan had established a puppet state, Manchukuo, with a pliant Chinese emperor at its helm. The international community responded with a mixture of condemnation and impotence. The League of Nations, the fledgling international body tasked with maintaining peace, condemned the invasion but lacked the military muscle to enforce its resolutions. The United States, preoccupied with its own economic woes arising from the Great Depression, opted for a policy of non-recognition but refrained from direct intervention. The consequences of the Japanese invasion were far-reaching and devastating. China lost control of a vital resource-rich region, its sovereignty brutally violated. The newly established puppet state, Manchukuo, served as a tool for Japanese exploitation, its resources funneled towards Japan's war machine. The invasion also emboldened militaristic factions within Japan, further eroding civilian control and paving the way for a more aggressive foreign policy. The League of Nations' failure to act effectively undermined its authority and exposed its limitations in preventing large-scale aggression. The echoes of the Japanese invasion of Manchuria continue to resonate today. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked nationalism and the devastating consequences of appeasement in the face of aggression. It highlights the importance of collective international action in deterring war and upholding the principles of territorial integrity. The story of the Japanese invasion of Manchuria is a saga forged in both steel and shame, a chilling prelude to the wider conflict that would engulf Asia and the world. It serves as a cautionary tale, urging vigilance against expansionist ambitions, the importance of robust international institutions, and the enduring responsibility to resist the erosion of global peace. In the next chapter, we will cover Hitler's appointment as Chancellor of Germany, as well as the Vargas era in Brazil.